right, good morning, everybody. My name is Maarten de Grote. I work for VITO, Belgian Research Institute, and my role for today is just hosting you through this webinar. So it's the lesser important of all the participants or the speakers that you see here. So today is about X-tendo, but before we go into the content, maybe just some quick housing rules. There, Roberta, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So we would like to have it an interactive session. So as you have seen most likely in the agenda, at the end of the session, there is time for Q&As. We would like to ask you to raise the questions using the chat function below. If you do have any technical issues, please address your questions to Roberto D'Angelo from BPIS. He's the technical backup and communication lead here. And also an important note is that today's presentation is being recorded. So for those that don't like this issue, you can leave always the room now, but I suggest you not to do so. So that's the simple housing rules. So already raise your questions during the presentations from the speakers. That would be helpful, but we cover them at the end of the session. So then on the next slide, a very quick overview of what X-tendo is, but I think the main reason and also my involvement in this project is that energy performance certificates have an enormous potential. What we actually see is that the implementation of EPCs across the member states is not reaching its potential. We see different scope, we see different available information, and therefore the reliability is limited, compliance, market penetration, and so can all improve. And from that perspective, we did write this proposal, I think already now 3 years ago, to improve it. And what we see now, and that's relevant for the discussion later on today as well, there's the energy performance of buildings directive, which is being recasted, which is being changed, and there are some critical aspects to improve the EPCs. What we did, or what we are doing under X-tendo, we are actually testing different features in 9 countries. And you see here the 10 features. The letters are quite small, but it goes from smart readiness, comfort, real energy consumption, towards more user related approaches like financing options, like the logbook and so on. And so each of these webinars will cover only one of these 10 features. And so today is how to measure and indicate the real energy consumption in buildings and how this can be included in an EPC. The main person working on this topic is my colleague Jan Verheijen. After I will maybe also quickly go through the agenda before we go into the content. So today we have first a presentation of Jan Verheijen on basically the methodology that is being developed for the real energy consumption, how to include it in EPCs. We have then the experience from Romania, which is Emilia Serna Mladin, who will basically present what was her experience on testing this methodology in Romania. And we have then a feedback from Stefan Thomas from the Wuppertal Institute, because they are in a sister project, if I can say so. A reflection from outside is always good to see what we are doing there. And at the end, we have 15 to 20 minutes time for panel discussion where we need your questions. So with this, I would like to introduce already Jan Verheijen. I think, Jan, you can start sharing your screen while I introduce you. So Jan is a researcher at VITO Energyville. We're in the same team, which is a sustainable built environment unit, and is working on energy performance and indoor environmental quality aspects. Jan, I will give the floor to you for you to share your screen. And thank you. Now still the presentation modus, and we're all set. There we go. Thank you. Floor is yours. And then, Jan, we don't hear you, and your presentation is not in presentation modus yet. Jan, do you hear us? No, we don't. I think we have a technical issue, but I do see Jan moving, so...
He's muted. Jan, you are muted.
Yes.
Okay, there you are, Jan.
Normally you should hear me now. Apologies for this interruption.
Voila, and you still have to switch to presentation mode because yeah, there it is, perfect.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Good morning also all on behalf of me, and thank you, Martin, for this introduction to the webinar and the project X-tendo and the topic of today. So I will present to you the method to determine the energy performance based on measured energy use. So we will cover context and the development up until the current status. We will have a brief look into the methodology, determine the measured energy consumption indicator, and then we will have a look at the scope of implementation with barriers and benefits to end with the next steps to show where we are and what still has to be done. So, what is the context? The EPC was introduced in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive in 2002, and implementation started in 2006. And currently, the energy performance indicators used in energy performance certification are mostly based on calculated energy performance. So this was reported on by BPIE in 2014 and again in 2020, showing not much change since. You can see it on the map here. So the green areas in Europe, these member states implement only asset rating, meaning that the energy performance is determined based on calculation. And then the orange zones, they either have asset and operational rating or only asset rating. So you could question, why would we need an energy performance determination method that takes into account actual values of energy use? So the graph shown here is an example of what is known as the energy performance gap. It's an example from Flanders in Belgium. It shows the energy performance gap for residential buildings. So the energy performance gap is the difference between the calculated and actual energy use. And here it is shown as the primary energy use and includes both gas or heating oil and electrical energy use. So it's quite stunning to see the difference, and we might pose ourselves the question, us working on energy performance of buildings in the building sector, as this is a stunning difference, and similar tendencies have also been reported on in other countries and for other building typologies. So from previous research, we know that the actual energy use in buildings could be as much as 2.5 times the simulated or predicted energy use, which is also shown in the figure. So the gray box plots show the actual energy use, and the blue ones show the results from the calculated or simulated energy performance. So this poses the question, what is the link with the actual energy performance of the calculated energy performance, and also in relation to the European long-term objectives? How do we know what is the status in view of achieving those long-term objectives? In this sense, if we base ourselves on the calculated energy performance, we are thoroughly overestimating the savings that can be achieved by the energy performance improvement measures that we suggest in our renovation advices. So what is the effectiveness of the renovation advice that is included in the EPC, one might wonder as well. Another aspect that also is important and is causing confusion to end users, or that hampers a clear interpretation and comprehension of the EPC, is the fact that the indicator is expressed in terms of primary energy. You could ask yourself how many people know what that stands for, and more importantly, how does that relate to the metering values and the information that people get in their bills, their energy bills, which relates to energy costs, which is of high concern to the end user, especially lately with the energy price increasing. So how does this real energy consumption relate to the ongoing revision of the EPBD? So 2 months ago, a proposal of the revised version of the EPBD was published by the European Commission, and it should be stated that it still concerns a proposal, as it still needs to go through Council and Parliament, but it already gives a good insight in the directions that are envisioned. So the EPBD recast is part of the Fit for 55 package and has two main objectives. First, to reduce building greenhouse gas emissions and final energy consumption, and also to establish a long-term vision for buildings with adequate contributions to 2050 climate neutrality. Related to real energy consumption, there are two main elements in the proposal. First is that the energy performance can be based on calculated or measured amount of energy. And there it is noteworthy that the terminology has altered from measured to metered. I do not know the exact reason for that. And also it concerns the energy use associated with a typical use of the building. And also the methodology should ensure representation of actual operating conditions. Secondly, the methodology should enable the use of metered energy to verify correctness. So it is not really clear what should happen afterwards with this verification efforts. Should they serve to close the energy performance gap? At least it is stated that the analysis should be done to make the gap more insight on this gap. In relation to the indicators to be used for energy performance certification, a harmonized scale for energy performance classes is proposed and to be based on the specific annual primary energy. In addition to this indicator, also the operational greenhouse gas emissions is to be included and the amount of renewable energy. So here it is stated that primary indicators should be the primary energy, and secondarily also to be included the greenhouse gas emissions, which is the operational value, meaning that it is to be based on measurements, is my interpretation. So all other indicators remain voluntary for member states to choose from, as in a toolbox approach. How did we develop the methodology to determine the energy performance based on measured energy use, and how far are we now? So first, the scoping analysis was done, on the basis of which a concept for the methodology is elaborated. This consisted of the state-of-the-art methodologies and implementation experiences, current practices within the EU EPC frameworks, and a survey was executed on end-user expectations and needs. All of these were reported on, and the reports can be downloaded from the X-tendo website via the links provided below on this slide. I will come back at the main outcomes of this scoping analysis in relation to real energy consumption in the following slides. What else? So for quality safeguarding throughout the development process, the methodologies are evaluated against 4 cross-cutting criteria. That is quality and reliability, user-friendliness, economic feasibility, and consistency with international standards. Also, several dedicated expert experience exchange meetings were held and interviews with experts were organized. And an extensive reviewing process is maintained, including 2 internal reviews and 1 upcoming external review. Also, a verification was done to evaluate the functionality, usability, and sensitivity of the calculation procedures. This was done firstly by studying interactions of functionalities and technical specifications of all the features amongst one another, and with a general energy performance determination method. So for this general energy performance determination method, the overarching European standard EN 52000-1 series was chosen with the default options. And then secondly, also verification calculations are done using theoretical reference buildings for 3 climatic zones in Europe, Northern, Central, and Southern Europe. As a result of these insights, beta versions of the tools are developed, so also for real energy consumption. And these are available since August last year and can be downloaded from the X-tendo website. Currently, in-building testing is being finalized, and reporting on that is being wrapped up to be published soon. And in the X-tendo toolbox that already is available online with the beta versions, you can read more about the context and the ratio behind the indicators, and as well as downloading the tool files themselves, which consist of a spreadsheet and accompanying guidelines. So let's have a closer look at the results of this scoping and preliminary analysis. First of all, the results of the survey on end user needs and expectations show very high interest in real energy consumption, and the potential to include real energy consumption in next generation EPCs is stated to be considered very high. So most respondents find inclusion of info on real energy consumption in EPC helpful to very helpful. And also feedback information on real energy consumption and comparison to similar buildings gains high interest and can instigate user behavior change. Let's now have a look at the results of the scoping analysis of the state-of-the-art methodologies and implementation experiences and how these have led to the development of the broad concept for the real energy consumption method. So more information can be found in the X-tendo deliverable 3.1, for which link can be found at the bottom of this slide again. So in it, methods to determine part or global energy performance based on data of measured energy use and related data are described and categorized in 3 main groups. The first category is the building level simple approach, which consists of all methods in which only limited post-processing is done on the data of measured energy use to derive an energy performance indicator on the level of a building or a building unit. A second category consists of methods in which detailed characterization of one or several parts of the energy balance is done based on measured data of energy use or related data. Also still on the level of an individual building. And then in a third category, that's the category that includes methods that use data of a large amount of buildings. That can be, for instance, all buildings of a specific building typology of a national building stock. And such methods can serve to develop part or overall energy performance methods or the development of benchmarks or rating classes. This is only one approach of categorizing all methodologies that are available. There are a lot of differences and a lot of variation within the methods that use measured energy data in energy performance determination. And a distinction between the methods can also be made on other principles. For instance, the methods can provide part energy performance indicators, or some methods can also provide overall energy performance indicators as a result, but could also serve to model part of the energy balance of the building. Also, energy performance indicators can be implemented in addition to or as a replacement for indicators currently in use in existing EPC practices. And also they can serve merely informative purposes, or they can be coupled to requirements and serve for certification themselves. Based on the results of the scoping analysis, it was decided that what was needed was a building level simple approach. So that is one of the first category. The concept of the building level simple approach that is developed within X-tendo for real energy consumption starts from measurement data of the actual situation with specific user behavior, specific outdoor and indoor climatic conditions. So then these input values are corrected to represent standard conditions of climate and use. This is done in order to enable comparison over time and between different buildings of the same type. So from these corrected energy use data, standard measured energy performance indicators are calculated that can be used for inclusion in an EPC together with information that is repeated from the original inputs. The further elaboration of the MEPI determination method is based on principles and calculation modules of different existing methods, such as the approach for standard measured energy performance of the overarching energy performance standard EN 52000-1, and also inspired by the Swedish energy performance determination method based on measured energy use data. So what are the expected advantages of such an approach based on measured energy use? It may lead to simplified procedures. It will allow to reduce the amount of on-site inspection and opens up options for automation and acquisition of information. It will lead to improved accuracy because it is based on the actual energy use. It will better represent the actual energy performance and hence contribute to closing the energy performance gap. It will also provide a better link with billing information and the energy cost, which is of high interest to building owners and may instigate behavior change. It will also enhance the specific renovation advice as the measured energy performance indicator is based on the actual situation. And it will also augment user acceptance because of the link with the final energy use. And it will also increase market trust because of the previously mentioned advantages, not the least the improved accuracy, which in turn may lead to more investments and a higher renovation rate. On a broader scale, it will also allow policymakers to improve the policy instruments as the measured energy performance indicator will better represent the actual energy performance of buildings and the building stock, allowing policymakers to better fine-tune policy measures in view of achieving the long-term objectives and attaining a decarbonized building stock. Let's now have a closer look at the calculation method, the flow chart of the calculation procedure. As an input, there is case-specific data to be provided by the EPC practitioners. Firstly, related to the building, some general information, the type of building and the useful floor area. Then specific data from monitoring is required. This, in fact, is the main input to the method, and it concerns energy delivered or exported per energy carrier and per application. And then also, depending on the options that are chosen in the methodology, also input related to the use is to be inserted, more specifically aspects related to indoor temperature and domestic hot water. So that is the case-specific input, but also on a higher level to be provided by the member states and related to the context and the model also, data needs to be provided related to the model options, such as weighting factors, climatic data, and data related to standard use. But for all of these data and information, defaults are provided in the methodology in case national or regional data are not available. So then in the next step, based on all this information, the calculation is done firstly by calculating correction factors to, from that information, reduce or deduce the standard inputs. Then based on that, the standard energy delivered and exported is calculated, and then from the energy balance, the energy performance indicators are calculated in the last step. So together with information that is directly adopted from the inputs, the output is generated with general information on building and model options that is repeated for information services. And then also the measured energy performance indicators are reported on. This is the energy delivered and exported on the final level. This is corrected for standard use and climate. And then the energy performance indicators, CO2 emissions and renewable energy ratio. We will come back to that in a second. But let's have first a look on the main input. Next to some general information on the building and other information, this is in fact the main input matrix. It shows input on the building level and consists of measurement data of energy delivered and exported from the building unit per energy carrier and per application. So a lot of thought went into this, and the data input structure of this calculation tool is established in a generic manner, meaning that it allows as much as possible input of the variety of buildings and system architectures as they can be found in the EU building stock. Also, at the same time, this main input matrix structure is limited to what is minimally needed to do the most essential corrections, as were mentioned prior in this presentation, to enable building comparison and comparison over time. It does have a consequence. The input requires the presence of monitoring infrastructure. This may consist of electricity, gas, oil, heat meters, or several of those. And the number and the type, location of these meters, they all depend on the system and building architectural configuration. So, for the most of the cases, the majority of the cells in the main input matrix will remain empty. Maybe a bit more clarification. So, the method was established in this manner as it is expected that the availability and the quality of low-cost sensor devices will increase substantially in the upcoming years. Nevertheless, it was acknowledged within the X-tendo consortium that the required monitoring infrastructure in most cases is not present in the existing building stock. So that's why we decided to complement the calculation tool as it is presented today by a report that describes options that can be used in cases where only limited amount of information is available. So this publication of the additional report is expected in the upcoming periods. After these inputs have been done, corrections are done, and these concern corrections to standard outdoor temperature, solar irradiation, domestic hot water use, and indoor temperature in heating season. So only the first correction to the outdoor temperature is implemented by default and is based on heating degree days and cooling degree days method. The other ones can be chosen optionally. This can be done on the level of the member state, or they can choose to leave the option open to the expert EPC practitioners to choose whether or not to include the option in the calculation procedure. So again, these corrections are implemented to allow for inter-building comparison and comparison over time. The output is then normalized to floor area, and these are the indicators that are all reported on in the output. So the main output consists of standard measured final energy delivered and exported. It is reported on in a similar matrix as the input matrix, only here it includes the final energy delivered and exported corrected to standard conditions of climate and use, and also totals per energy carrier and per application are given, which would allow end users to compare the values reported with their billing information, which is important as this is of high interest to the end user. Next to that, several energy performance indicators are reported. I will briefly go through them. So the main indicator is the energy performance expressed as primary energy. That's the one in the table on top row. And there are several variants for this indicator. The first one is the non-renewable energy performance. So the top one is, for the non-renewable energy performance, there are 3 variants. The top one is for the case the on-site produced electrical energy is not taken into account. The second one only takes the self-used part of the total on-site produced electrical energy into account, not the exported part. And the third variant takes all, so both self-used and exported part of the on-site produced electrical energy into account. So next to that, also the total energy performance indicator is included. So this means that the energy performance is calculated based on weighing, including both non-renewable and renewable conversion factors. Then also renewable energy ratio is reported, the CO2 emissions, and then output related to the produced electrical energy on site on the final level is also included. So important maybe to note is that member states implementing bodies can choose from all of these outputs which ones to include in the EPCs. This can be done then in line with their national context and existing practices. Maybe also noteworthy is that the ones that are indicated here in bold in the table, those are the default ones suggested by the European standard EN 52000-1. So these could be considered as the default options for member states if they do not have preferences in making this choice. So the MEPI method, the measured energy performance indicator, can be applied to both single-family houses and to multifamily houses on the level of an apartment unit or for the entire multifamily house. It can also be applied for all types of non-residential buildings, such as offices, educational buildings, healthcare facilities, and so on. Also, public buildings are in the scope. Only industrial buildings are not in the scope, which is in line with the general EPBD approaches. So as mentioned, it does require monitoring infrastructure, and as also mentioned previously, an additional report is being expected soon. So the main benefits are related to the aspects user friendliness and quality and reliability. We have presented these in an earlier slide, so we will not go over them again. For the next steps to conclude this presentation, currently in-building testing has been finalized, and it has been done in 4 different EU countries on different building types. Maybe noteworthy to mention is that most of these, I think all of these buildings do not have the detailed monitoring infrastructure installed that is required to apply the MEPI methodology. So some assumptions had to be made and analysis done prior to enable completion of the main data input matrix. And this was done mostly starting from billing information and final level energy meter data. So reports on the outcomes of the in-building testing are currently being prepared. And based on these insights from the in-building testing, the tool spreadsheets and guidelines will be revised and submitted for a last external review prior to the publication on the X-tendo website. Also, recommendations for implementation, including implementation guidelines and estimation of the potential for replicability, are currently being prepared, and these also will be published via the X-tendo website. That's all from my side. I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you would have questions, as mentioned before, please put them in via the chat. And I now hand over the mic back to Maarten. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for this extensive presentation. While then you are stop sharing the screen, our next speaker, Emilia Mladin, can take over the screen. I'll also give a small introduction there. As the proof of the pudding is in the eating, we have foreseen within the X-tendo project the testing of the different features. And that's exactly what Emilia did. Emilia is professor at Polytechnical University of Bucharest in Romania, but she's also the president of the AAECR, which stands for Romanian Association of Energy Auditors of Buildings. I think at the same time I see here, Jan, you maybe need to stop sharing your screen, that Emilia can take over.
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to do that.
Okay. Maybe Roberta can support there also, throwing out Jan, well, not Jan, but his presentation.
That would be nice. Thank you for your assistance.
Voila, there we go. Thank you very much. Emilia, please share your screen. So the presentation now will be about the testing in 2 buildings in Romania. And after that, we have a reflection from Stefan Thomas from Wuppertal Institute. So Emilia, the screen and the floor is yours. And while Emilia is doing that, actually yesterday in the rehearsal, everything went fine. So I'm quite confident it will go fine here as well. Voila, there we go. I think we already see your screen. Some questions were already raised in the chat panel, which is excellent. So please add more questions there. Thank you, Emilia. We see now your web browser already, and now still the presentation. There we go. And still presentation mode. Oh, and yeah. Thank you very much, Emilia. And I think you're still on mute, so feel free to unmute yourself and start the presentation. Thank you. Roberta, can you maybe unmute Emilia? And then Emilia, you have to put back in presentation mode.
Yeah, it's done now. Now, can you hear me now?
We hear you fine, and please put on the presentation mode.
Okay, thank you, Maarten. So I was implementing partner for this feature in X-tendo. My colleagues Stelian Băra and Madalina Carbureanu, we all worked on implementing the testing for the features in the project. And this feature was tested on 2 buildings, a multi-family building and a single-family building. For the multi-family building, I chose what you see in this picture is a block of flats, which is very common in Romania, with 4 levels, or we also have with 8, 10, 12 levels. But this is very common, and it's connected to the district heating for heating and for hot water. Also connected to the national electricity grid with a general meter per apartment. and with no renewable energy sources. So it's a very common situation that I wanted to be tested to see how relevant this feature would be in an EPC for such a building. What Jan presented, I will go very quickly over the summary building input that contains some information about the building, the size, the address, and then the consumption that was input in the tool for almost a full year, basically a full year, to be representative for the building, and also with the system efficiency that were known, so basic input, and then the corrections that were chosen for these real energy values, the results, and the results with all energy performance that Jan also presented that can be chosen to be included in the EPC. These values may be very different from the calculated ones, but I will have a comment on this later. For the single family building, I chose a house that was finished, but still you see some outdoor works were going on. I chose this house because it has renewable energy sources as PV panels on the roof that you see here. They cannot be seen here, but here you see there are two systems, one on grid, one off grid with batteries that you see here, with a building energy management system for the house to deal with different energy supplied from different sources, local and the grid. The energy was metered by a double flux general meter, being able to show what was the energy produced on site, what was the energy used, and what was exported. Again, the summary building input with all the information and the corrections applied, and then the results. The results here that what Jan showed, it's a variety of indicators, and we may choose a couple eventually to put into the EPC. Which were the barriers in implementation on the market? And here I have some comments that may affect the use of the real energy, not affect, but still influence the usability of real energy consumptions. Unavailability of submetering per energy use or application, which requires some simplification when trying to separate per application, because by energy carrier is not that difficult. Most of the buildings have meters for fuel, for district heating, or for electricity produced or used from the grid, but still per application is extremely rare. Lighting for non-residential is not included in the applications and may be an important consumptions, as I said, especially for non-residential. Significant impact of user behavior, like comfort level, presence or absence in the building, education for not wasting. I was extremely amazed by the differences between real energy consumptions and the calculated ones showed by Jan earlier today, showing that real energy consumptions were much lower, and we have to think why, especially when the consumptions were high, people not being able to pay, so the comfort is not there. Real energy consumptions, we should be very much aware that relates to building and user. Building and user. If the user changes, moves, and another user comes in, then we might have a different energy consumptions. And another aspect is that the corrected values are still unrecognizable by the end users if not accompanied by the final energy values existing in the bills. The corrected ones are like the estimated ones. They don't see, you know, the figures that they see on the energy bills. And then we should put in the EPC the final energy values plus the corrected ones. And then we will have on the EPC the estimated, the real final energy and the real corrected values. It becomes pretty complex, and we should see how we can make it easier for the end user to understand the information in the EPC and what is the advantage for him to have one. Definitely, we have benefits to expect, like users would value more the EPC for the information and the improvement that are advised. But we have to keep in mind that sometimes some applications are missing, and maybe what we recommend will lead to higher energy consumptions if hot water is not enough used or even provided, or cooling in the summer because they cannot afford to pay for it. Utility suppliers could optimize their business locally. So not only the users, but also the utility suppliers could see what exactly is going on and take some decisions. Local authorities could also take better decisions for improvement of energy performance of buildings for each, you know, neighborhood, not for every building, but also for the neighborhood. Okay, so this was my presentation. If there are questions, this was my experience with real energy consumptions, and I want to emphasize that there is a very high interest, like Jan said, among end users, but not only about real energy consumptions. But we are the experts to see what are the barriers, what are the benefits, and how we should present it to motivate people to do the right things to diminish waste, not consumptions necessarily, but waste, energy waste.
Thank you, Emilia, especially for the last message to give us an overall contribution also. I think it's also important that we as X-tendo ourselves, we are being scrutinized. I mean, we are ready to receive critics, or at least to receive feedback in a correct way. And I think with Stefan Thomas, we have found the perfect person to do so. Stefan is Director of the Division Energy, Transport and Climate Policy at the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy. What is also more important is also coordinating the Horizon 2020 project, called the EPC, and Stefan, correct me if I pronounce it wrong, which is about high quality energy performance assessment and certification in Europe. So if I understand correct, Stefan, you do not have a presentation, but we're very happy to hear your feedback or your findings on the work that we have done so far. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for inviting me to this webinar and to comment on your efforts to improve the methodologies for using real energy consumption on EPCs. While I haven't had the time yet to take a full detailed look into your methodologies, and so found the presentations very interesting. My impression is that the methodology is overall plausible, and as Emilia has pointed out, however, of course, depends on the availability of sub-metering, and maybe we can discuss a bit later for Romania and Germany or other countries what is the situation regarding this. And in Quality EPC, we have the focus of our project on improving the relation between EPCs and energy renovation of buildings, and aim to make them a tool that also is conducive to deep energy renovation. But we also developed a proposal for an improved template, a more user-friendly template for the EPCs that if member states adopt it and slightly adapt it to their political preferences and needs, would still harmonize the presentation of the EPCs across the EU. And this also includes a section on real energy consumption. Although we did not specify this section a lot, and it's open to member states to adapt it. We also have seen that there are member states that have chosen to use real energy consumption as the basis for the energy performance indicator. So for these member states, your methodology would probably be an improvement because it includes these corrections. However, I saw that mainly only the weather correction is mandatory, which is of course an improvement, but it will normally not bring big differences from the actual measurement to the corrected values. Similarly, it is good that it includes the energy generated and reports it separately, or allows to report it separately, and also to correct it for solar irradiation, but that already is optional. Looking at the example from Belgium that Jan has shown, and other experiences, why the difference between calculated and measured consumption is so big, particularly for the worst buildings, then I think we have to look into what is called user behavior. It may be that many households have a certain budget for heating, and if their building is bad, then they reduce their comfort by only heating several rooms, as it was common in all of Europe in the past, in our grandparents' generation still. So people, and of course, yeah, if they are smart, they reduce heating when they are not in the building at all, or at night, so I see two ways to bring calculated and measured closer together. One is to adapt the measured, the corrected for the user behavior, but yeah, you only have that as optional, and you propose to have a temperature measurement, but maybe it would be more conducive, but of course that needs a lot of testing, to have a user questionnaire, asking them how many rooms, at which temperature they heat, and if they reduce heating or turn it off when absent, or to adapt the method for the calculated energy performance to include to change the standard user behavior. Probably currently it is assuming continued heating throughout the year of all rooms, and maybe at least for both for residential or for office or so, this could be adapted. And in any case, it should be stated probably. But having all this in mind, I'm not a fan of using real energy consumption as the basis for the energy performance indicator, but I think the energy performance indicator should present the quality of the building. If you also, if you use the real energy consumption as the basis for the okay, if you use the real energy consumption, you are suggesting to the user, you're not informing them of the quality of the building, and you are actually suggesting that the next user will also be forced to adapt his or her comfort in order to keep within certain energy and budget limits. And this is one reason why I think the energy performance indicator should be based on calculation methods. But maybe it should state that the indicator is based on the assumption of continuous use and heating or cooling more clearly than it has been before. Also, if you base the renovation recommendations on the lower actual energy consumption, then you undervalue the benefits of energy renovation, which are also improving comfort or reducing problems of mold and moisture, and thus improving health. So still, I also think that, as Emilia has suggested, the actual final energy consumption should be given on the EPC, as we also suggested it from Quality EPC, because this is a proxy for the energy costs that the user may expect using, okay, the heating and cooling behavior of the previous user. However, this should probably be given not as a specific indicator per square meter, but for the building or the building unit overall, so in kilowatt hours per year, both for the consumption and also for the production. So because this is more important of the energy costs. And this is what my suggestion would be for the use of indicators. Still, when final energy is given, it should be corrected, at least for weather or also solar irradiation. Where member states decided to use energy performance indicators based on the real metered energy consumption, then also your methods will certainly improve the indicator that is being shown. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on this topic of the real energy consumption.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stefan. I think some interesting insights. I also see that Emilia is very eager to respond. I will give right away the floor to you, Emilia. I also would like to give first maybe Jan, as the designer of the method, the potential to respond. So what I suggest is that we first have a response both from Jan and Emilia on Stefan. And then I go through some of the questions. I already do have a question actually on the questions. So on Shuang Guo, on your question on using standard energy performance indicator mix, if you could maybe explain a little bit more what you mean with the indicator mix, that would be good. So Jan, a quick reaction maybe on Stefan, and especially I like the suggestion of Stefan, or what you said, like we need a kind of an indicator for the quality of the building. Question whether or not if that can be done under one indicator, or if you need several indicators for end users to get a good understanding of how the building works. Jan, the floor is yours, and then Emilia, I will give the floor to you.
Yes, thank you, Martin, and thank you especially Stefan for showing and sharing your insights and views on this in relation to the important aspect of clarifying or showing the quality of the building. And in that respect, I do think that the energy performance indicator that is based on the measured energy data does show the actual performance, although you're absolutely right that the user behavior is one of the most important contributing aspects to the energy performance gap. But the intention is to correct for those aspects. And indeed, the corrections on those aspects are included in the method currently as optional, except for those for the climatic conditions, the external climatic conditions. But they are included as default. The only reason why they are included as optional is because it requires additional information to be provided by the member states, and it's just to give them more options in a sense that if they do not have this information, that they still can implement the methodology by not including these options. But again, the default is to include all the correction options in order to correct for those important aspects deviating from the standard conditions of climate and use. Then yes, the suggestion to also include perhaps questionnaires to gain insight on the actual use of the building. I do think that is very valuable and could improve the method. It's a bit counteracting on the current expected advantage of improved simplicity of procedures, as this would again perhaps maybe lead to additional procedures on the acquisition of information for input. Yeah.
If I may,
feel free to react.
Yeah, if I may, it's clear that questionnaires can have a high level of uncertainty themselves. This is why probably there needs to be calibration in a sample of buildings, comparing the temperature sensors that you propose, but which are probably a lot of measurement effort, although measurement gets cheaper, and the use of a questionnaire to see if it can be calibrated, and if the error in the questionnaire is not too high, so that it could be used as a substitute for the temperature measurement. Maybe it's something that you could also just discuss in your report as a need for or suggestion for further analysis in the future. So,
Okay.
sorry for interrupting.
No, thank you. Maybe giving the floor also to you Emilia, as a reaction also from your side.
Yes, I have more aspects to emphasize. One, the questionnaire is very important, but it cannot be included in the EPC or the annexes because it's confidential. Then there is such a huge demand for real energy information, and this tool is extremely good because it can provide some calculation based on the real energy values. But the difference between the calculated, what is currently done for the EPC, and the corrected real energy consumption show us something about the user. And I think that tabulated values with some underneath comments why the real energy corrected are higher or lower than the estimated ones should be extremely valuable, because we may have either artificial savings because they cannot pay the bills, okay, or waste of the user because he can afford, he doesn't care, she doesn't care, so they simply use as much as they want. So the difference between the calculated ones and the corrected real ones just show us important things about the user, and make the user aware what they can change in their behavior if they want to diminish waste and improve comfort. So they both are extremely valuable. The currently calculated ones are related only to the building. The corrected ones are related to building end user. The difference shows us, and we can recommend to the user something, not only for the building, for the user behavior. So let's look at this information this way, because this is how they become both valuable, and we cannot stay only with the real energy consumptions, no way. But on the other way, the users should also see that it's reality there. It's not just, you know, something they don't get it. They don't get anything but the comment, you know, the end user, with no matter what background, they understand only the comments and the recommendations if they are not technical and directly involved in this kind of business.
All right. Thank you, Emilia. I understood from Jan that he would like to clarify one thing more on this discussion, and then we go to the questions from the participants. Jan?
Yes, yeah, very valuable insights as well. Thank you, Emilia. Related to the choice of indicators, whether it should be based on calculated or measured, as it is in the EPBD recast proposal, both are still possible, and it also depends on the local context and also the EPC practices that are in place, and whether or not the indicator is used to replace current practices and indicators, or whether it is just included as an additional informative indicator. So in that sense, it is very useful that it is very much and good explained where the difference comes from. Currently, these final energy values that are corrected for are included to enable the comparison with the energy bills, which I think is very important. And as you mentioned, Stefan, you would prefer to have those expressed in kilowatt hours per year, so that a clear link with the actual billing information is there. We chose to do that in specific values, so normalized to the floor area, to also enable comparison between buildings. And for those, they can be interpreted actually as what can be expected as energy consumption in case an average occupant would occupy the building, or average occupancy profiles. So in that sense, that could also be a good idea to include that as an explanation into the EPC, maybe also in relation to your remarks, Emilia. As for the indicators, I think that the EPBD recast proposal also includes the primary energy as the first option. And with the introduction of zero emission buildings instead of near zero energy buildings, I do also think that the suggestion of the CO2 emission as a also main indicator is important. And there it is suggested that that one could be the operational one. And that's a very good suggestion indeed, I think, because this in the first place relates directly to the long-term objectives of decarbonizing the building stock towards 2050 on the one hand. And on the second hand, I also think it better relates to what is common sense on environmental impact, or in this sense, energy-related environmental impact, as primary energy is not appealing as a parameter to most people.
All right.
So
Thank you very much. No, I think the reference to the recast and the CO2 emissions operational aspects are very crucial there. But I think we should now go to the questions of the participants, because there were some questions. We maybe raise first a question from Dieter de Busse from European Copper Institute. Hello, Dieter. We've been working quite a lot together in the past, but the question that he raised was like, how you explain that the measured energy performance indicator can simplify the procedures, as at the same time the data requirements are rather onerous, are rather complex to fetch. Maybe Jan, Emilia, and maybe Stefan, for the three of you, both from a European perspective, but maybe also very concrete for Belgium, Romania, and maybe Germany. Ladies first, maybe. Emilia, you first.
So for this first question, if only using calculating indicators, how do you take into account?
So the question is, how can we simplify this procedure as much as possible? So because
Okay,
the building requirements.
I was reading the questions from the chat, the comments.
No, sorry, I think it's a third question from the chat.
Okay, so I think we definitely should keep somehow the real energy consumptions, but simplify the procedure by considering only energy use per energy carrier, because most of the buildings are metered that way, and sub-metering requires a lot of knowledge from or investment from the user, which is we cannot impose, or a lot of work effort from the assessor to do some regression or statistical analysis of the data. So in order to not block the use of such information, we should go by energy carrier, not by application.
Okay.
Because this is what people pay and see on the meters, gas, electricity.
Thank you very much. That's already clear. Jan, your reaction on how to simplify procedure as much as possible? You're on mute.
Sorry for that. Yes, maybe first in comment to your answer, Emilia, is that so the energy per application is required to do the necessary corrections in order to have a standardized output and not to be too much influenced by user and external climatic conditions as they are in a specific situation to enable comparison. But indeed, the input matrix, if you would want to complete it for the majority of the buildings, will require monitoring infrastructure, dedicated monitoring infrastructure with sub-metering, which in most cases currently is not available. So, but that is the requirement. You need this monitoring infrastructure. And on the positive side of the balance, you gain a large reduction on the requirements of on-site inspection. And alongside with that, you may also want to automate the data acquisition, maybe even reducing the necessity to go on-site and have full, automated determination of the energy performance based on measured energy data. But indeed, it is acknowledged that in most countries, as it is the case in Belgium and Flanders, that this dedicated monitoring infrastructure is far from there. And therefore, we did anticipate to write a report on options that are available to use in case this information is not at hand. And in that respect, I do also think that the current setup with the input matrix structure is a good start. Also in use with simplified procedures that would require assumptions or prior analysis before you could input into the matrix, that this matrix indeed currently represents a minimal data input structure that allows the necessary corrections. So in that sense, it will also be useful to apply in conjunction with, let's say, methods like there are in practice, the statistical analysis in which you derive baseload energy use, and then you separate the energy use for heating and cooling, and then you would need to do some assumptions in case all is electrical, for instance, or when is it used for cooling, when is it used for heating. But those methods exist and they can be used in conjunction with the general framework of the current MEPI tool as it is.
Thank you. A question following up on that to Stefan, maybe. Jan mentioned that the dedicated monitoring infrastructure that is needed. I often say that cars are smarter than buildings. Basically, you drop your key in the garage, or the garage even knows already the performance of all the different aspects within your car, and from your building you don't know that. Do you see there any how do you say, promising aspects toward the future that let's say in between 5 to 10 years from now, this dedicated monitoring infrastructure will be basically natural, or in some type of buildings, maybe different than in other buildings?
Yeah, I was going to speak about Germany and the situation here, and here in rented buildings, and we have 55% of dwellings are rented. From 2026 onwards, we will have digital meters allowing monthly reading, at least for the heating, probably also for the water heating. So in rented buildings, water heating is metered separately already, and the reading will probably be smart from 2026 if building owners comply with that legislation. In owner-occupied single-family buildings, hot water is not metered separately, so you would need calculation rules. On the other hand, for photovoltaic generation, as the owner of a single family building, I have to report to the tax office every year how much I generated, how much I used myself. So that information should be available, but needs to be collected. More recent systems may have also the possibility of remote reading. But for indoor temperature sensors, that is something clearly additional. That's why I suggested this idea with the user's questionnaire instead.
Okay, thank you very much. I also then would like to go back to the question from Xiang Guo that I asked, also a clarification there. So the question there was, do you think EU countries can use standard energy performance indicator mix to decide on the EPC label? So I asked for clarification what ERC meant with the indicator mix. And so the response was a mix referred to real energy consumption indicator, primary energy demand, share of renewable, and so on. And he wonders whether we can have two measuring systems, one for the quality of the building, one related to user behavior. I think we covered that more or less already on the reactions, but maybe a reaction from Jan or Emilia on this?
Well, we cannot have two measuring systems. I mean, how can we measure the behavior of the user? And now we have to pay attention at the GDPR. If we are allowed to state too much on an official document about the behavior of the user, the energy consumption, this is private. Okay, so we have to take care of that also. I think we need just a general statement to make aware of the user that something should be done. Something may be done and should be done. Not much into details. The questionnaire is for the assessor to understand the differences because it's a way to also calibrate its own calculation. What's going on? Why did I have that? And what is the difference? And then going back to the user and asking questions, about the absence, probably for a longer period, or having people over for a longer period. There is always an explanation for the differences, and then the assessor can do the recommendations on the official document without the details.
That's a very good point, Emil, and I will give right away the floor to Jan, but indeed it's also related with Emil. He responded in the chat box, like the privacy of homeowners. How far do you go in involving them, and although GDPR, of course, as well. Jan, do you have any feedback from the survey we maybe did on privacy aspects, on behavior aspects?
I have to disappoint you on those details. I should look into that. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. And then going back to the question from Chuang Guo, do you would like to add anything there?
Yes. Well, I think you should have in mind two main target audiences for the EPC. There are multiple, but well, to get to the key points, the first one is the end user, the people that occupy the buildings or the facility managers. The second one are also the policy makers that try to steer evolutions towards decarbonized building stocks. And in that sense, it is a good idea, I think, to maybe include multiple indicators. And then on the question whether those should be related to real energy consumption, my vision is that at least it should be included in one or another way, because the current situation, I refer to the energy performance gap, is something that we as professionals in the building sector engaged in energy performance of buildings should be looking at ourselves. This is, I think, a situation that is astonishing. So we need to do something, and the EPBD recasts includes two options, and I think hints at the option in which you would have a calculated energy performance indicator, which is then verified by measurements. I think that would be a good option. So then the link is laid out at a higher level and not at the individual level. But in relation to the end user, I do think it is useful to also include information on the real energy consumption so that the end user is instigated towards behavior change by a comprehensive indicator, let's say final energy use that is corrected. And that can be linked to the energy bill, which is very important to the end user. Which indicator it should be, you can debate on that. I think the CO2 emissions is a strong candidate. But yeah, there are aspects in it because currently it is only containing operational energy, and you could also argue for broadening that scope and also include broader environmental impacts that can be translated to CO2 emission indicator as well, with life cycle analysis, for instance, the impact of the materials that have been used, etc. And that is, I think, the discussion that is most relevant at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much. I do want to get back to the privacy issues. Also a question to Stefan, because it is my understanding that privacy is also very much almost country and cultural related. For example, I do think that the EPC database, it's really accessible in countries like Denmark. I also think in Ireland, for example, there's quite a lot of data. You can check the EPC of your neighbor. In Germany, there is, I think, a history of having it much more private. I don't think there's even a national register with digitalization of these aspects. How do you see this moving forward, also, for example, from a German culture and perspective? You're on mute.
Germany would clearly be a progress. The database that the Commission has suggested in its proposal for the recast of the EPBD. Yeah, in the end, however, it's a political decision. If policy thinks that the common interest of combating the climate crisis is justifying a deviation from the general data protection regulation yeah, publishing the EPC indicators for each building. Yeah, no, I think the proposal still has some discretion to the member states of how much information they would make available, only as averages over a certain amount of buildings or otherwise anonymous, or really by for each building by address.
Okay, thanks. No, you make also the perfect bridge to finalizing, but I will give a last question to the floor, but I would like to make the link to for example, the concept of the digital building logbook, which was now mentioned for the first time also in the recast. And I personally have been working a lot on that concept. It's where all the building data is gathered in a central data box or data hub or whatsoever. And it's actually the building owner or user that can decide which information is being shared to whom and why and for which period. I think that is a very relevant concept also from privacy perspective. But actually my last question to Emilia and to Jan, you have 1 minute to give an elevator pitch for the people, the policymakers on the negotiation table for the EPBD recast. What would you tell to them? How would you convince them to include and to strengthen the measured or real energy consumption within the EPC? What would be your elevator pitch? Emilia, are you ready for an elevator pitch there? You're on mute.
Maybe I can already.
The elevator pitch would be to have the trust of the people, because right now the trust is pretty low. So once we have the real energy, the final energy they can recognize would give them the feeling that they really need the document, they can trust the recommendations. So we notice the huge demand for this information on the EPC.
Okay, very strong point and argument, Jan, and then after Jan, Stefan to end.
Well, I have been talking a lot during this webinar, so I will keep it very brief and refer to the presentation. And I would emphasize the aspect of the energy performance gap to start with as a practice that is astonishing, I think. And then I would refer to the expected advantages, as I mentioned before. I will not repeat those again. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jan. So, Stefan, if you would be joining the negotiation table on the EPBD recast, what would be your main contribution there?
Yeah, I'd say it is good to present also the metered energy consumption, but then it should be corrected. And if member states accept metered consumption as a basis for the energy performance indicator, it should also be normalized or corrected for weather and use and other issues as they have proposed.
All right. Thank you very much to all of you. We are at 10:31. I think the session was until 10:30. So I would like to conclude. I would like to thank especially all the presenters, speakers, Emilia, Jan, and Stefan. I also would like to thank the participants. This is not. This is one webinar in many. There are 3 more webinars to come. So please take a look at the website of X-tendo, or it will be also sent to you. I understood from Roberta that both the slides and the recorded will be sent to you afterwards. You see here also last slide that this kind of project is always a teamwork of many partners, and I have to say it's great work being done, and I do hope we can change some things in the future of Europe. Thank you very much, and looking forward to meeting you in the future. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.